Hello, and welcome to another Poetry Deep Dive today. I love Denis Martindale. He has written over 3,700 poems for the Poemhunter website. Denis Martindale has written a new poem titled The Magnificent Magpie, and here's what the poem's message shares with us today. Okay, so let's dive right into this explainer by looking at the wonderfully relatable, completely grounded starting point of the poem. The opening line reads, "I was walking past my window and something caught my eye." It's such a simple everyday moment, isn't it? Just a quick, almost accidental glance out the glass while you're, just going about your day. But in poetry, and especially in Martindale's deeply observant work, this mundane little action is the exact spark needed to ignite an entire flight of fancy. I mean, we've all been there, right? You're distracted for a split second by something outside. But here, it literally becomes this open gateway to a remarkably vivid internal adventure.
To really get this psychological stage for the fantasy that's about to unfold, we have to talk about the classic Walter Mitty archetype. If you're not familiar, a Walter Mitty is basically an ordinary person who frequently indulges in these elaborate daydreams of personal triumphs. And the source material points out that Martindale places himself firmly in this beloved tradition. He spots a bird just doing its thing, and suddenly, boom, he's lost in a daydream. He's imagining what it would be like if he forced himself on a strict diet, shed all his excess weight, and just sprouted powerful wings to fly off into the sunset. It is a highly humorous but honestly, deeply human desire to momentarily escape our ordinary heavy boundaries.
Which brings us to our first major section today, a marvel of avian agility.
So the poet snaps right out of his indoor lethargy and into this brisk, marveling observation as he watches the magpie work. He describes the bird absolutely beautifully with the phrase, "one half snow and one half coal." It's this visually striking contrast of black and white that elevates the magpie from, well, just a common garden scavenger into an adult in his absolute prime, a creature of pure dignity, instinct, and focus. And then we get this intense, suspenseful micro-narrative playing out right outside his window. First, the magpie flies up to a telegraph pole. We're talking a dizzying height where humans would normally require special gear to climb. Second, it lands securely on a metal hand support. Third, it twists around to settle at the very top. And finally, it leaps just a foot higher to balance perfectly on an incredibly thin wire. Martindale breaks down this bird's precise, flawless sequence of movements. Sure, it's an everyday acrobatic routine for a bird, but it's observed with such intense, focused appreciation that it honestly feels like you're watching a gold medal Olympic event.
The poem really emphasizes this physical perfection, stating, "Without a mishap, slip, or flaw, it balanced on the wire." We can so clearly see the poet marveling at the bird's sheer confidence and undisputed expertise here. He specifically notices how the magpie's claws hold tight on this tricky, swaying wire, making a point that this wasn't just some easy, stable garden fence to perch on. No way. The bird stays there completely unbothered until it suddenly takes flight again. And it's that stark contrast between the extreme difficulty of the perch and the breathtaking ease of the bird that triggers the poet's profound sense of awe.
But then we move to the next stanza, and our second section, the gravity of reality. It's time to come crashing back down to earth. So, the crucial point here is this brilliant juxtaposition. On one side, we have the effortless physical reality of the magpie. It's agile, it's free, it's perfectly adapted to the sky. And on the other side, well, we have the poet. As he bluntly puts it, he's 13 stone and that truth stings. He's fully, and kind of tragically, aware of his own heavy, wingless reality, stuck down on earth, just watching from the confines of his room. He notes that to the magpie, this balancing act wasn't great or even worthy of applause. But to the grounded poet indoors, it was an absolute first-rate performance that really shines a harsh spotlight on his own physical limits.
This stark realization leads to a wonderful, almost childlike outburst. He says, "Why can't I fly? I've got no wings. I'm not as light as he." It's just this beautifully comedic lament about his very permanent, very dense human limitations. But, instead of letting this realization bring him down, this playful frustration actually acts as a creative springboard. It naturally launches him straight out of reality and into his ultimate unrestrained Superman fantasy. It absolutely proves that while his physical body might be a stubborn 13 stone, his imagination remains completely weightless.
And that phenomenal leap of imagination kicks off our third segment, a whimsical world tour, exploring his Superman fantasy.
Let's map out the poet's meticulously imagined flight itinerary, shall we? He dares to imagine what he would actually do if he had those powerful wings and could just fly off into the sunset like a comic book superhero, leaving his earthly weight and worries entirely behind. And you've got to notice the charming escalation of ambition here. Step one, he'd start small, just flying around the local neighborhood without a single plan, getting a feel for the air. Step two, grand ambition strikes, and he'd cross the Channel to visit Paris, France. Step 3. He'd roam all the way across Europe to Rome. It brilliantly showcases how his daydream expands so powerfully across the continent. But then, look at step 4. After all that grand, exhausting adventure, he decides he wouldn't advance any further. He'd simply toddle off back home. It is a delightfully grounded, incredibly British ending to his superhuman fantasy.
Which leads us perfectly into the final phase of his journey, the homebird's return, where we take a look at domestic contentment.
We bring all that high-flying, jet-setting energy back to a cozy, somewhat abrupt halt, because despite his soaring imagination, the poet admits he is truly a homebird at heart. The adventure is incredibly fun to think about, for sure, but the return is where the real, tangible comfort lies. And here is my absolute favorite visual from the entire poem. I'd perch myself upon a chair, pot noodle close at hand. I mean, it is such a highly relatable, charmingly ordinary image. His superhero flight across the majestic capitals of Europe ends with him munching away on a pot noodle. He describes feeling totally contented and without a single care, enjoying a simple rest to take things off his mind. He even marvels that God had been so kind just to give him this quiet, peaceful moment with his snack. It so brilliantly undercuts the majestic grandiosity of the previous stanzas with this wonderful everyday domestic contentment.
But, as the source text reminds us, you just can't keep a good man down. His irrepressible spirit is already bubbling right back up to the surface. He's back in his chair, completely grounded, pot noodle in hand, but he's already excitedly planning tomorrow's mental excursion. Scotland, Ireland, or Wales, he asks himself. Or perhaps he'll bypass the rain entirely and fly straight to sunny Spain, where sunshine never fails. His physical journey may have ended in the armchair, but his mind is already packing its imaginary bags for the very next day's flight.
To wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a thought directly inspired by Martindale's wonderfully evocative verse. Consider the comforting reality of being a daydreamer like our poet. It's this universal, incredibly powerful human experience that can turn a mundane, dreary afternoon into a breathtaking, borderless adventure. So ask yourself, if you were looking out your window right now and you caught sight of a magnificent magpie taking flight, where would your own daily flight of fancy take you? Would you stop at the local neighborhood, or would you head straight for the sun? Thank you so much for joining me to unpack the delightful imagery and humor in Denis Martindale's work. Until next time, keep your eyes open and keep looking out those windows.